In October of 2003, the Kaibab National Forest Field Office in Coconino County, Arizona, received a routine biological survey report designated under internal tracking number KB Wildlife 03-174. The report documented a standard ungulate mortality assessment conducted along the Navajo Rim Drainage Corridor, approximately 19 miles southeast of Jacob Lake at an elevation of 8,400 feet. The survey crew had been deployed to assess seasonal deer population decline in grid sectors 9 through 14 of the Kaibab Plateau's eastern boundary zone. The official findings listed 3 carcass recovery sites, 1 soil disturbance zone of undetermined origin, and 4 camera trap deployments across the survey area. Attached to the report was a laboratory submission manifest listing 11 biological samples forwarded to the Forest Service's Flagstaff Regional Laboratory for taxonomic analysis. Of those 11 samples, 9 received standard classification results, 2 did not. In the field marked taxonomic designation on those 2 samples. The laboratory technician had written a single word. That word was inconclusive. No follow-up request was filed. No additional collection was ordered. The survey was marked complete. The file was closed 4 days after the laboratory results were returned. No explanation for the early closure was attached to the record. The chain of custody log for the 2 unclassified samples has never been located. My name is Dr. Renata Sylvain Albert. I worked for the United States Department of Agriculture Forest Service for 17 years. Assigned to the Kaibab National Forest out of the Williams Ranger District, with a secondary posting to the North Kaibab District beginning in 2001. My formal title was Wildlife Biologist, Grade 12. Specialization in ungulate population, dynamics, and predator-prey interaction assessment. I held a doctorate in wildlife ecology from the University of Montana, and I had conducted field surveys in 7 western states before I was assigned to the Navajo Rim Corridor in the fall of 2003. I came to know what I am about to describe because I was the lead scientist on that survey. I was present for every documented event in Field Report KB Wildlife 03-174. I was also present for the events that did not make it into that report. I did not speak publicly about this for more than 20 years. My reason for staying silent was straightforward. I was a federal employee, and I valued my position, and I was not certain that what I had seen was something I could defend in a professional context. My reason for speaking now is equally straightforward. I retired from federal service in 2019, and I no longer have a position to protect. I am not asking anyone to believe me. I am asking that the record reflect what actually occurred. I have not worked a solo field assignment since October of 2003. The Navajo Rim Drainage Corridor sits at the eastern edge of the Kaibab Plateau, where the ponderosa pine forest thins toward the canyon country that drops into the Marble Canyon system below. The terrain in grid sectors 9 through 14 is mixed conifer and open meadow, broken by shallow drainages that run north to south across the plateau edge. The nearest paved road is Forest Service Road 67, which feeds off of State Route 89 near Jacob Lake. From the grid boundary to that road is 11 miles of maintained gravel. From the road to the nearest town with a hospital is 47 miles. I mention this because distance matters in the field. It affects decisions. It affects how long you wait before calling something in. I was deployed with 2 crew members. Darren Ackefer was my field technician, a Forest Service employee of 6 years, who had worked with me on 3 previous surveys in the North Kaibab. He was methodical, and he had good instincts with equipment. He did not dramatize things, which I valued. The second crew member was Caitlin Marsh, a seasonal biological aide hired through the University Cooperative Program. In the second year of her master's degree in ecology at Northern Arizona University. She was 26 years old and she was competent. She asked good questions. We deployed to the grid on the morning of October 7th, establishing base camp at a Forest Service equipment cache site near grid marker 4, which sat on a flat meadow shelf at 8,380 feet. Our equipment included standard biological survey kits, 4 Reconix trail cameras, handheld GPS units, a foam core evidence transport case rated for sample integrity, and a portable radio relay unit for contact with the Williams District Office. Our daily routine was fixed. We left camp at first light, ran assigned transect lines through the grid sectors, and returned by 3 in the afternoon. We logged samples and GPS coordinates, conducted the evening radio check-in at 5, and reviewed camera trap data after dinner. The routine was not interesting. That was its purpose. On the third day, Darren noticed that the trail camera we had mounted on the ponderosa pine at grid marker 11 was facing north-northwest. He had mounted it facing south-southeast toward the drainage bottom 2 days before. He photographed the camera's position, logged it as potential wind displacement given the gusts we had experienced the previous night, reoriented the camera, and we moved on. I noted it in my field book without comment. We ran the transect on the morning of October 10th. Caitlin located a mule deer carcass approximately 230 meters northeast of grid marker 12, in a shallow drainage that ran toward the rim. The carcass was adult female, estimated at 140 pounds. What made Caitlin stop and call me over rather than proceeding with standard documentation was the arrangement of the remains. The skeleton was largely intact, which was unusual given the exposure time we estimated from the tissue condition, approximately 3 to 4 weeks. The skull was positioned facing uphill. The rear legs had been folded beneath the pelvis, in a configuration that does not occur through decomposition or scavenger redistribution. Darren's initial read was that multiple scavenger species, particularly ravens and coyotes working over an extended period, could produce irregular skeletal positioning. He was not wrong to offer that explanation. I have seen scavenger redistribution produce unusual configurations. I did not immediately reject his assessment. I photographed the carcass from 12 positions, collected bone samples from the left femur and the right radius, and took soil impressions from the surrounding area within a 3-meter radius. When I processed the femur sample that evening, I noted compression fracturing along the midshaft inconsistent with vehicle impact, fall trauma, or the gnaw patterns associated with any predator species native to the Kaibab Plateau. The fracture geometry suggested force applied laterally from both sides simultaneously. At a point approximately midway along the bone, I documented this in my field notes. I did not transmit it in the evening radio check-in. I wanted to wait for the laboratory analysis before characterizing it. What I did not record that evening, and what I am recording now, is the detail I noticed when I first crouched over the carcass before the documentation began. The marrow channels in the exposed long bones were intact. Nothing had fed on the afternoon of October 12th. I drove the 11 miles to Forest Service Road 67 and used the satellite relay phone at the road junction to make a call to the Navajo Nation Historic Preservation Office in Window Rock. I had a professional contact there from a previous consultation on a cultural resource survey I had worked the year before. I explained that I was conducting a biological survey in the Navajo Rim drainage corridor, and that I had encountered some anomalies I wanted to understand in a broader context. The contact was courteous and told me that for questions specifically about that stretch of the rim, I should speak with the Eastern Navajo Agency's Land Use Protocol Office. She gave me a name. The name was Hosteen Bitsley. I called the number she provided and reached him directly. Hosteen Bitsley was 71 years old at the time of our conversation. He had served as Land Use Protocol Officer for the Eastern Navajo Agency for 34 years. His role was not ceremonial, and it was not advisory. It was administrative. He was responsible for maintaining the formal land use designation records for roughly 400,000 acres of Navajo Nation territory adjacent to federal land along the Eastern Plateau boundary. His office coordinated with the Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and the National Park Service on a regular basis. He was a bureaucrat. I want to be precise about that because the word elder is sometimes used in a way that implies someone speaking from tradition or spirituality. Hosteen Bitsley was speaking from institutional records. When I described the general grid area, he was quiet for a moment. Then he told me the Navajo name for that stretch of the drainage corridor. The functional translation, as he gave it to me, was the place that does not give back what enters. He told me that formal avoidance protocol for that area had been in the Eastern Navajo Agency's land use designation records continuously since at least 1962, and that he personally believed the designation was older than the written record. He was careful to distinguish between what individual tribal members believed about that area and what the institutional record reflected. He made this distinction twice without my prompting. Belief, he said, is personal. Protocol is written down. The protocol had never been rescinded. He had reviewed it himself 3 years prior during a routine designation audit. He asked me how many people were in my survey crew. I told him 3. He told me that the designation recommended crews of no fewer than 4, and that solo travel in sectors 9 through 14 was not advised under any circumstances. I thanked him and drove back to camp. I did not tell Darren or Caitlin about the call that evening. On the night of October 13th, the trail camera at grid marker 11 captured movement at the eastern tree line, beginning at 11:47 in the evening and continuing until 3:52 in the morning. The camera was set to record on motion detection with a 30-second clip interval. It recorded 41 clips over that 4-hour period. In 38 of those clips, a shape is visible at the tree line at a distance I estimated at between 60 and 80 meters from the camera position. The shape does not move between clips. It is present in the same position across 4 hours of footage. It does not approach. It does not retreat. It does not interact with the surrounding environment in any way that I could detect. It is not possible to determine morphology clearly at that distance and in that light. What I can say is that the shape was vertical. It was not a horizontal animal form. My estimate of its height, triangulated the following morning against a ponderosa pine of measured height at the tree line's edge, placed it at between 8 and 9 feet. I showed the footage to Darren the next morning. He watched it twice. He said it was a dead snag, a standing dead tree, and the motion detection was triggering on ground fog. I pulled up the GPS coordinates for that camera position and overlaid them against the arborist survey map from the previous summer's fire hazard assessment. No standing dead trees were logged within 90 meters of grid marker 11. I did not say this to Darren immediately. I wrote it in my field book. I checked the soil at the tree line that morning. I found impressions in the soft ground near the drainage edge. The impressions were not consistent with any ungulate or canid track profile in my reference materials. They sank 31 millimeters into soil that held my own boot print at 9 millimeters. I photographed them, measured them, and placed them in the evidence case. None of us slept particularly well after that night. We did not discuss this openly. We ran our transect lines on October 14th and October 15th without incident. The radio check-ins were routine. We played cards after dinner on the 15th, and Darren won 3 hands out of 4 and complained that Caitlin was counting, which she denied. The normalcy of those 2 days is not something I have figured out how to account for. On the morning of October 16th, I woke at 5:30 to run equipment checks before the day's transect. I walked to the sample staging area near the equipment cache, where we kept the foam core evidence case and the labeled sample kits organized by grid sector on a folding table. The folding table was undisturbed. The evidence case was closed and latched. The sample kits, however, had been removed from the table and placed on the flat rock shelf approximately 3 meters away. The rock shelf was a granite outcropping about 40 centimeters high that we used as a seat. The kits had been arranged on the rock shelf in a row, organized by size, smallest to largest, left to right. Nothing was missing, nothing was damaged. The zippers on the kits were closed. The rock shelf was not near the table's edge and was not reachable by wind displacement. I stood at the table for approximately 2 minutes before I called Darren over. We both looked at the arrangement. He said that neither of us must have secured the table properly the night before, and that a large animal, a mule deer or a black bear, could have investigated the kits and knocked them to the shelf. I looked at him while he said this. He looked back at me. Neither of us spoke for a moment. The kits had not been knocked. They had been placed. The progression from smallest to largest was exact. I walked to the ponderosa pine, adjacent to the equipment cache, which was the largest tree within 10 meters. On the trunk, at a height of approximately 7 feet from the ground, I found a mark. It was not carved. It was not scratched. The wood fiber at the mark center was compressed inward, as though significant pressure had been applied to a surface roughly the diameter of a closed fist. There was no tool mark, no edge pattern, no splintering. I photographed it with a scale card. I collected a bark sample. I added it to the evidence case. In my field book, in the margin next to the entry for that morning, I wrote a single question. I wrote, "Does it know we are cataloging?" I will not sensationalize what happened on October 17th. I have been careful throughout this account not to use language that outpaces what the evidence actually supports. And I will continue to be careful here. At 0800 hours, Caitlin departed base camp on foot to complete the solo transect line for grid sector 13, which runs approximately 1 mile east from the base camp position toward the rim edge. Solo transect work was standard procedure on that survey when 2 crew members were needed for a parallel task. I was processing soil samples at camp. Darren was conducting a GPS calibration check on Sector 10. Caitlin's assigned transect included grid markers 6, 7, and 8, and she was expected back at camp by 10:30. At 11:15, when she had not returned, I radioed her handheld unit. There was no response. I radioed again at 11:20. No response. I secured the camp and began walking the Sector 13 transect line. I found her at 11:52, seated at the base of a large ponderosa pine, approximately 40 meters east of grid marker 7. She was upright. Her eyes were open. She was not injured and she was not unconscious. But she was not responsive to voice or touch. She was not in distress in any observable way. She was simply not present in the interaction. I sat beside her and waited. At 12:03, which I know because I was watching my watch, she blinked, looked at me, and asked me when I had gotten there. She had no memory of anything after passing grid marker 7 on the inbound leg of her transect. Her GPS unit logged her route. It showed her walking the transect normally until grid marker 7, at which point the track ended. There was no signal loss. The unit simply stopped recording forward movement. It showed her stationary at grid marker 7 for 1 hour and 49 minutes before I reached her. She was found 40 meters east of that marker. The camera at grid marker 7 had been repositioned again. It had been mounted facing east into the sector. When I found it, it was facing west, away from the sector, out toward the meadow and the camp. It was no longer pointed at anything. The grid survey was designed to document. It was pointed toward where we slept. I transmitted a priority report to the Williams District Office that evening. The following morning, an incident response team from the Kaibab National Forest Regional Coordination Office arrived by truck at the Forest Service Road Junction. I will give the Forest Service credit for one thing. They responded within 18 hours. What they did after they arrived is the part of this account that I have the most difficulty describing without allowing my own frustration. To color the record, the file opened to document the incident was assigned number United States Forest Service 03, Arizona 2291. 3 Forest Service law enforcement personnel and 1 regional wildlife coordinator spent 4 days on site. They reviewed our camera footage. They examined the evidence case. They collected additional soil samples from the area near the tree line at grid marker 11. They interviewed all 3 crew members separately. The written summary of those interviews, which I obtained years later through a Freedom of Information request, described Caitlin's episode as a probable vasovagal syncope event, meaning a fainting episode related to dehydration and exertion. The responding physician who evaluated her at the Kanab Urgent Care Facility on October 18th found no physiological markers consistent with that diagnosis. The tracks near the drainage were described in the official documentation as inconclusive as to species of origin, with no follow-up collection ordered. The bark compression mark on the ponderosa pine was not mentioned in the incident summary at all. 3 weeks after the team departed, the laboratory returned results on the 11 biological samples. 9 were classified normally. 2 were listed as inconclusive due to insufficient material, using that exact phrase. I know for a fact that the samples were not insufficient because I collected them myself, and I logged the collection weights at the time of collection. A Forest Service wildlife specialist named Philip Esteves, who had reviewed the unclassified samples independently, filed an internal written objection to the inconclusive designation in November of 2003. He cited specific methodological concerns about the laboratory analysis protocol. He requested that the samples be submitted to a secondary laboratory for independent review. His objection is referenced in the file index. The objection itself is listed as removed per supervisor authorization in February of 2004. Philip Esteves was transferred to the Willamette National Forest in Oregon. He retired early in 2006. I reached him by telephone once, in 2012. He confirmed that the samples had been redesignated as destroyed prior to the secondary review he had requested. He told me there was no destruction documentation on file. Then he asked me not to call him again. File number United States Forest Service 03, Arizona 2291 was formally closed on October 17, 2003. That was the same day I filed the priority report. I want you to understand what that means. The file was closed on the day the report was filed, not after the investigation, not after the laboratory results. The same day. I am speaking now because I am retired and because the record as it stands is incomplete. And an incomplete record is a different thing than an honest one. Since October of 2003, I have not accepted a solo field assignment. I have offered professional explanations for this over the years, scheduling preferences, administrative workload, and none of my colleagues pushed back on it because there was no reason to. It was not a strange preference. It was just a preference. The question I was left with after that survey, and that I have carried since, is not what was in that drainage corridor. That question interests me less than it once did. The question I carry now is about those two samples, not what they contained. What the laboratory saw when they looked at them, that made the word inconclusive the only word they were willing to write. Inconclusive is not a classification for something unidentifiable. Inconclusive is a classification for something that contradicts the available framework. There is a difference. The one thing I have not put into this account, and that I will not put into this account, is the full content of what Caitlin Marsh told me privately, 2 years after the survey. About the one image she retained from the hour and 49 minutes she cannot account for. I will not include it because she signed a separation agreement when her seasonal contract ended in November of 2003. And the non-disclosure clause in that agreement was not standard Forest Service language. I have reviewed standard Forest Service seasonal separation agreements. I know what the standard language looks like. What she signed was not it. She asked me not to repeat what she told me. I have honored that. I will continue to honor it. The Navajo Rim Drainage Corridor is still designated wilderness area under Kaibab National Forest Management. The grid markers are still in the ground. Some of the cameras we deployed in 2003 were never recovered. The Eastern Navajo Agency land use designation for that stretch of the rim has not been rescinded. I confirmed this through a records request in 2022. File United States Forest Service 03, Arizona. 2291 is listed in the Regional Archive Index as closed, not destroyed, closed. There is a difference between those two things as well. A closed file can be reopened. I do not know if anyone ever will.